Hello and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Compliance Week and GAN Integrity. I'm Oscar Gonzalez with Compliance Week and now I'll be your host. Today's webcast is AI in compliance and ethics. What's wrong, what's not, and what comes next. Before we hear from our presenters, let me review the agenda. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll pose them to our guests at the end of their presentation. After the Q&A, I'll wrap up the webcast. Now, the webcast will offer CPE credit for all attendees. Please use Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser and disable your pop-up blockers to ensure access to the exam. Once I have signed off and the webcast is completely over, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts@complianceweek.com. Once again, to ensure receipt of your CPE credit, please use Google, Chrome, or Firefox as your internet browser. If you've missed anything, I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so stay tuned. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. There you also find the feedback form for the webcast. We welcome your thoughts as we are always looking to improve your experience. If you wish to increase the slide size, you could hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the top right of your screen. And lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Now, I'd like to welcome today's speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce Colin Campbell. Colin is GAN Integrity's Strategic Product Marketing and Analyst Relations Leader with over 15 years of experience in the SaaS software and tech industry. Colin has led analyst relations and product marketing growth strategies in North America, EMEA, UK, and APAC. Growing revenues in multiple industries. At GAN Integrity, Colin drives market expansion, demand generation, and significantly enhancing customer retention with a talent for aligning marketing strategies with business goals to deliver results. I'd also like to welcome Andrew McBride. Andrew is CEO of Integrity Bridge, LLC, a consulting practice offering strategic and operational compliance support for companies. He has over 25 years of compliance experience at an international law firm and several multinational companies in the Americas, Europe, and Australasia. In his most recent role as Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Albemarle Corporation, he built a new ethic and compliance program and recruited a new team against the backdrop of the FCPA investigation. All right, and again, just for some housekeeping, you will receive a copy of the presentation and a recorded version of the webinar via email after the conclusion of the webinar. And please use the chat feature to ask any questions. And here's our overview and agenda. Again, overview of the current AI landscape and compliance, practical risk-based use cases, what's working, responsible compliance AI by design, key takeaways, Monday morning to-do list, and a Q&A. So yes, once again, it's great to have Colin and Andrew with us. So with that, Colin and Andrew, it's all yours. Get us started.
Hey, thanks, Oscar. And again, thanks to Compliance Week for facilitating, I think, what shall be a great discussion around AI and use cases. I'm also thrilled to be partnering again with Andrew. You know, we've been working for a little over a year, Andrew, right, and really driving forward some, sort of thought leadership and some discussion around this space and where the market is headed and where we see AI being practically used by compliance and ethics teams in all of their different use cases. So great to be with you again. I put this slide in here a little bit of tongue in cheek, right? I think AI has obviously advanced a lot further from, being a content engine to take content, change it, right? And, we have seen over the last few years great advancements in terms of how AI can be used across a great compliance and ethics industry. And so, as Oscar said, we'll take a look at who's using AI, right? What are we using it for instead of just talking about it? What are some of those practical use cases? Right? We'll deep dive into 5 specific clusters of work where we're seeing AI being used to add value now to compliance and ethics programs. We'll have a bit of an honest conversation about what's not working, about some of the failures and where the guardrails are with AI. And then kind of look at a sort of sneak peek into the future. We all hear about agentic AI and the use cases for that. So let's see how that's traveling and how that looks this year and into the ensuing years. So before we get into that, Andrew, I'd love to hand over to you to talk about this kind of promise versus the practice of AI and share your thoughts.
Thanks very much, Colin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Compliance Week and to GAN Integrity for allowing me to speak with you all today. So yeah, I think before we get into the detail of particular use cases, Colin and I would reflect on kind of like those macro themes. And so on the next slide, we'll have some survey results. But in terms of some of the themes that I've been picking up, Colin and I have been picking up through our panel sessions and conferences and speaking with people. I mean, I think that much like in any other kind of workforce segment, there was this concern that is AI going to take our jobs? And I think that also it was fair to say that there was perhaps an over-exaggeration of the abilities of AI, certainly initially. And then there's this kind of realization that it is a little bit limited. It requires some careful handling in how you're setting it up, whether it is in your role of in ethics and compliance in using AI in the execution of your ethics and compliance program, or if you have a role in relation to responsible AI. I will say that given if you are involved in the management of AI and responsible AI, then it's probably a safe bet that the people who are there as the gatekeepers, the human gatekeepers, are probably the last person to kind of like lose their job to AI, because it's so critical to have that human in the loop. And so if we kind of go to the reality, I mean, I think that there is still wide variation in that pickup of AI. I see some companies leaning in, and I see others that are, whether it be through outsourcing or through the development of their own use cases, and then some that are still kind of like at that tactical level. And we'll talk about that arc of maturity coming up. And I think that, looking ahead in terms of that shift in dynamic now, we've moved past the kind of like, will AI work? As it is getting better and better, it's how do we manage it? And in some respects, leaning into AI and actually understanding how it can work for you in your ethics and compliance program is a no regrets move, because your ethics and compliance program will improve, but it will also help you from a technical point of view understand how it works, so that when you're assessing other AI use cases put forward by business units and other functions, then you're able to ask the right questions. So we move to the next slide. We've got some survey data that we collated. I will call out that there's a survey also coming out very shortly from Compliance Week on AI use case. I think the results of that are going to be announced next week, so be on the lookout for that. But there's some survey results both at the macro level, at the ethics compliance level, and then we also have some specific results that GAN put together on the next slide. But taking a step back in terms of what the key messages are, certainly at that macro enterprise level, there was a very significant rapid adoption of AI, at least people using AI. But then there was kind of like reality hit hard, and there was a very well publicized study by MIT last year that talked about only 5% of enterprise Gen AI cases, pilots achieving revenue growth. And also the study reflected on the fact that when companies were outsourcing some of those AI use cases, it was perhaps having a better degree of success than if it was being developed in-house. On the ethics and compliance side, I think that the picture was broadly similar. I think that there's a perception that compliance was perhaps a little bit further behind some of the other revenue generating functions like sales, even supply chain. But there is that opportunity, and maybe it's a quid pro quo, right? If compliance is there to help the company manage the risk, the broader risk associated with AI, it also needs some resources itself to actually implement its own use cases. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the feedback that I've been getting from in-house compliance teams in a moment as to their maturity and the steps along that maturity curve. But I'll hand over to Colin to talk about the GAN integrity survey.
Thanks, Andrew. And this survey we just recently published with Compliance Week, and we looked at third-party risk, right? It's a big area of focus for organizations, and just really kind of started to drill into the ways that not only third-party risk is maturing and evolving, but how organizations are using AI across their business. And the results are pretty interesting, right? I think we all know from a due diligence and continuous monitoring, there are the traditional databases that a lot of organizations are using, and that came through the bottom two bars of this chart indicated, I guess, high usage. But we're also starting to see, some of the emergence now of AI across both risk screening and enhanced due diligence, right? So it's starting to come in there. And I think as you and I were talking, Andrew, it's at 20%. It's kind of, I think of the Jeffrey Moore is crossing the chasm, right? It's kind of going from early adopters and into, more of a mainstream, and, people are starting to adopt it. But I think what we also hear through the survey, and I know, Andrew, you and I have, separately and together talked to a lot of organizations, right, who are using AI. There is a little bit of a lag, right, in terms of adoption, right? And I think the things that we hear, some of those are this trust deficit, right? If we think about AI, can you audit a black box, right? It's going into this large language model, right? And if it says it's high risk, you want to know why, right? So there's a trust angle to this as well. Thinking about data hygiene, right? It's that probably unflattering truth, right? It needs clean data. If your data is not clean, right, there's this fragmentation, and you're going to get results that aren't accurate. And then I think fragmentation of ecosystems, and that's something, Andrew, we're going to talk about a little bit more, right, in terms of that fragmentation and how you can think about that across AI and the use cases that we'll share on the call. But I was curious if you had any thoughts on the results of this survey, because they were very interesting, right, in terms of where AI is in adoption.
Yes, what I found was kind of like some of the lower adoption rates, particularly the utilization of AI. I certainly seen, obviously, with GAN's product, companies, the compliance tech companies leaning into the use of AI to make things more effective and more efficient. So the reduction of false positives being an obvious one. But I think that we're still kind of like at the early stages of realizing the value of AI. We've got used to, whether it be internally developed solutions, externally developed solutions, of our products being designed based on the technology infrastructure of that time. With the advent of AI, does it actually require you to rethink the architecture of your product so that it is kind of like AI driven by design, if you will?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, on that topic, and I'll go to the next slide, because I think, Andrew, you did a lot of great work in terms of thinking about AI and using it to support the tactical work of ethics and compliance professionals. I'd love you to kind of expand on this area of research you've been looking into, because I think it's very valuable as people look to their own AI journeys.
Yeah, so just a bit of context. As I was talking and speaking to compliance teams for much of 2024 and 2025 with the setup of Integrity Bridge, it led to the preparation of a white paper around ethics and compliance use cases, and also just an understanding of how compliance teams were kind of experimenting with AI. This paper was published back in May of last year, and I think we have a link to it at some point throughout the slides, and maybe it's available for download. Just in terms of this point about the tactical work of ethics and compliance professionals, at that stage, AI was being used as a way to kind of like enhance the discrete roles that ethics and compliance teams kind of make. And if we kind of cycle through the visuals on the slide, there are several kind of discrete roles that I identified. So being an interpreter, so being able to kind of like translate materials, even interpret kind of the way in which policies are framed, being a drafter, so actually drafting, whether it be policies, communication materials, training materials, being a researcher in the context of, say, due diligence or investigations, or a data analyst. So almost taking the role of the traditional analytics tools like Power BI and Tableau and doing that analytics for you to help you kind of move past the spreadsheet, if you will. And then the monitor and the investigator. So actually supporting your role if you're leading investigations. And if we move to the next slide, I think it's kind of helpful to position where these kind of like that tactical kind of work sits within the broader arc, the maturity arc of the adoption of AI. And Colin, we can skip through all of the icons so that they're all on the screen. And some context to this, I've run similar workshops where I've asked 3 questions of the audience. The first one is how many of you are using AI in your personal lives? Almost 100% of people put their hands up, say they're using it in their personal lives. Second question is, are you using it on a tactical level in your daily work? 95% of people are doing that. And that's where that prior slide comes to the fore, right? That's kind of like where you are each fulfilling one or multiple discrete roles in the execution of your company's risk and compliance program, but you're using it in a way where it's a bilateral discussion between you and whatever AI application, enterprise AI application that you're using, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and so forth. I think where we're seeing kind of like that curve go now is that kind of like bilateral relationship extending out, where then members of the team are sharing their successes and their failures amongst peers. It's leading to a coalescence around some possible use cases for team collaboration, which would then have the added benefit that there is a consistency of how members of the compliance team are responding to doing particular activity, and perhaps even an enhancement of quality, because you're able to pull your resources and your knowledge for the benefit of every single member of the team. And then at some point, this tipping point that Colin referred to, where it moves into a team collaboration project, where you're actually investing in a discrete AI use case that would be for the benefit of the compliance team and maybe even for the company at large. And really that's going to be the main purpose of today's session, is to talk about some of those AI use cases where you're moving from the day-to-day tactical on that bilateral relationship with AI to more of a team kind of like dynamic, where the AI use case is for the benefit of the team or for the broader company. And at some point in the future, we'll talk about right at the very end, it could be about the use of agentic AI and workflows, where you're essentially joining the dots between individual use cases to create a process, an AI-driven process, rather than just one AI activity.
So Andrew, I love that maturity arc, right? I think it sets up the stage very well for what we're going to look at in terms of some of the use cases. And as we step into that, we were talking about this understanding of the Gen AI architecture, right? And thinking about how this all comes together, right? And I'd be interested to get your views and the work you're doing around, the knowledge base, the concept here, and then thinking about some of the pitfalls as we go into this and some of the things that organizations should be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So this is kind of like an oversimplified representation of the AI architecture of a given use case. And in the interest of transparency, I kind of like am building my own AI use cases to support my consulting practice, and it revolves around kind of like some core kind of like inputs. So firstly, you're driven by kind of like whatever the enterprise AI model or models, you may have a choice, that are prevalent in your company that are being you as an employee are allowed to use. For example, Integrity Bridge, we use Copilot. That's our kind of model of choice. And then in terms of the set of the custom use cases, I mean, the key thing is your knowledge base, right? So what are the materials that are going to be put in as your corpus of knowledge that the AI is going to rely on when it's responding to kind of like your the user chat queries? And I've had some real interesting learnings there because, yes, right, you're automatically controlling the domain from which the AI is getting its information from. It's not going off to the internet, for example, to get public source information in many use cases. But what I've also learned is that there can sometimes be a value of being very intentional about how that documentation is being uploaded. So as an example of that, I'm creating an AI use case which contains a database of public modern slavery reports issued by companies around the world. And through my own AI coach, so human, not AI, he's actually human, he has been kind of helping educate me that rather than just uploading the statement, it really helps the AI if I can supplement it with some enhanced metadata, because that tagging of things like title and description and categories really helps then that when the AI is calling upon that data, it can kind of really find the key documents that are the most relevant to my particular query. So that's one learning. The other, particularly if you're looking to build these in-house, is that's not just the only source of information. There may be some useful enterprise data that could be helpful, either in terms of the knowledge, so you're drawing from a particular compliance system, or it could be from a controls point of view. You're drawing from your HR system to set controls over who has access to what information within the AI application. And then perhaps the final kind of really important piece is the prompting, the actual prompt that's setting up the actual AI use case. What is the behavior that you're expecting the AI model, the activity that the AI is meant to do? And there is a particular art in the way in which you're crafting those prompts to make sure that it's doing what you asked. So that's kind of like the architecture. And I think, Colin, we're going to kind of walk through several use cases to kind of see how this works in practice.
Yeah, and I think that last point you raised, Andrew, as we go into those use cases, I think is really relevant when we think about building this out, the prompting, right? It's often when I don't know if you've experienced this, or we've all probably experienced this, you enter a prompt one day and it gives you some results. You enter the same prompt, it gives you different results. And I think as we tap into these use cases, is just thinking about the data and the knowledge bases and how you're using that and how you build the prompts, because I think that's going to create consistency and that trust, right, in the way that AI is operating. And so as Andrew mentioned, we put together a series of 5, or what we call compliance AI clusters, or 5 use cases that we want to kind of drill into, right, and think about these as opportunities for compliance and ethics teams to start to use, to explore, to start to leverage across your own programs. So we'll get things started, Andrew, on policies and procedures. Big common topic area for AI.
Yeah, and I think that this is perhaps one of the, I say, lowest hanging fruit in terms of a popular AI-driven use case within ethics and compliance. But the more you think about it, the more it requires some thought as to how it's put together. But there's a broader theme here that this concept of clusters, right? So you may have one particular main driver for setting up an AI use case within your company or going external. But the effort that you put in to develop that one thing, like a AI policy chatbot, then enables you to extract additional value from that same investment for other related purposes. So in the context of governance, policies and procedures, you would invest in setting up that knowledge base of your company compliance policies, your code and other ethics and compliance policies. You're obviously working on the appropriate prompting to set up that policy chatbot. Once you've got that up and running, you've now got this really kind of like strong database of documents that are there. You've got the prompting, you've made those learnings. Well, that same kind of corpus of material can also be used for slightly different AI use cases in the world of ethics and compliance governance. And so you see them there. You could have it support you drafting new policies in a way that's consistent with your existing policies. It could be that you've drafted a new policy and you'd like it to do a review. Maybe you're reviewing it not just against kind of the full suite of policies, but maybe there's a policy and policies in your company and you're asking it to review for compliance, your draft for compliance against that as well. Or maybe it's perhaps getting a bit more complicated, it's a policy assurance tool where it's actually looking to see whether the setup of your individual policy, all of your policies are compliant, that there's none that are out of date, that maybe it can flag if an employee who's named as an owner has actually left the company because you've been able to pipe in your HR information data, so it could flag if an employee has left the data. In a way, the AI is perhaps kind of filling the gap that some policy management systems aren't currently able to deliver. And then if you feed it other types of data from your policy management system around employee use, then perhaps you can use it as an interface to get metrics around that employee use, which, as we all know, is a very important proxy for compliance program effectiveness. And so this is just one example of a cluster of AI use cases around one pillar of the ethics and compliance program. And we'll move on to some more, but perhaps I'll throw it back to Colin to see if he's got any thoughts.
Yeah, the thought I had here, and as you were talking about that, Andrew, and I was thinking about the expansion beyond the policy chatbot into these other areas, and that foundation that you talked about of having the knowledge base, right? And I can see organizations thinking now about, well, how do I attach disclosures into this now so that I can actually validate disclosures against my policies? And you think about the metrics and the assurance that you touched on before. So it starts to open up this world of opportunity, right, where you're starting to connect that policy data in this particular cluster with what's actually happening right there, right, and how employees are engaging with the policy and how they're disclosing, raising incidents, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But that's I think a consistent thing that I hear as a great outcome from this, right? You're layering on, that data on top of this, and you're building all these capabilities into your program. Yeah.
So similar principle here with training and communication. So if you invest in the knowledge base of all of your policies, but also add in your existing historic training material, maybe some past examples of frequently asked questions coming from employees, and also copies of responses, anonymized responses from the compliance team to that, you can build this knowledge base of training and communication material that can then help you develop new material in a way that is consistent with what you've already prepared. And I think really what this enables compliance teams to do is break down those silos of traditional categorization between training and communication. Really, what we're talking about here is multiple different types of employee engagement. And so it can develop training material, but it can also develop some ad hoc training scenarios to support engagement with a local leadership team at a country or a business unit level. Maybe it can help support with a generation of Q&A to be put onto your company intranet site. Again, if you're plugging in data from your learning management system, it might be able to offer analytics and, importantly, narrative that moves you beyond kind of the traditional training completion statistics, but more into training effective statistics. And so that same principle, bringing relevant materials together that you already have, and then setting up individual use cases such as these with the correct prompting, can be a real force for it making things potentially more effective and more efficient.
That's fantastic. I can see a lot of use cases here, that's kind of jumping off the screen here. And as we move into third-party screening and due diligence, I think, again, another use case where AI has some real benefits, both from an operational perspective and efficiency and effectiveness, but also outcomes. I'd love you to kind of share your thoughts on this, Andrew.
Yeah, so there are certain AI use cases. I know, for example, the work that GAN has been doing on improving the false positive rates and leaning into AI to kind of help do that. If you think about that principle that I was talking about just a moment ago with policies and training of, wouldn't it be great to have all of the relevant information in one place? Well, when it comes to third parties, when you're running a due diligence on a platform like a GAN or some other platform, you already have all of the materials relevant for one particular third party in one part of your platform. And so this idea that you're able to then use that collated material, your business justification form, your business partner questionnaire, maybe there's a draft contract, the screening results, boots on the ground due diligence report. I think I read a study somewhere that said on average, the totality of due diligence material on one third party now is averaging anything up to 200 pages. This is a ripe use case for AI. That ability to assimilate that information based on guidance and prompting by you as to what to look out for. It can do multiple things in your role as a due diligence kind of risk management expert. It can support the preparation of questions for the third party. It can identify inconsistencies between what your internal sponsor is saying and what your business partner is saying. It can help you assess the quality of their policies and how they compare against your business partner code of conduct. It can think about appropriate recommendations, and it can dig even deeper into things like hidden incentives in your contract structures by taking a look at the compensation and remuneration structure within the contract. So you have all the information collated already. And so being able to kind of utilize that collated material to get more effective and more efficient with your due diligence, I think that we're really just scratching the surface. It's very interesting. I see that our colleagues in cybersecurity are already there in that they are having these large SOC 2 reports that are coming from vendors that they're needing to digest to understand how effective their cybersecurity controls are. And they are leaning into the use of AI to help assimilate this wealth of material that is in their possession. Colin, are you there? All right, Colin has frozen, and so I think I'll just carry on until he joins. If we can see that, though I have.
I'm here with you still, Andrew. So I'll keep an eye out for Colin. Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just see if I can. Yeah, I can click through the slides here. Perfect. So again, similar principle with Speak Up in investigations. through the entire life cycle of your speak up and your investigation, there is an ability for AI to serve as your investigation coach. So it can support the review and the assimilation and triage of the original allegation. It can also support with the actual intake. There are now examples of kind of AI chatbots that, interestingly, employees apparently feel more comfortable talking with an AI chatbot to raise their concern than making a call into a call center. It can help you with the review of evidence to call out, again, similar to diligence, inconsistencies in the way in which between what a subject of an investigation is saying and what the rest of the evidence is saying. It can support the preparation for interviews and also then ultimately the preparation of your draft investigation report. And then finally, it can support with analytics as well. Do we have Colin back, or am I going to keep going, Oscar?
No, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Very good. Not at all. So, Colin, we just, in your absence, we covered speak up in investigations, and I just wanted to check in to see if there's anything that you would like to add there.
The only thing I was going to, just as I was dropping off, is back on third-party risk, and I was thinking on that slide, as we had things like ERP data or other enterprise data coming into it, I think this is where, when you were talking about the maturity curve, right, as compliance use cases also start to expand the opportunity beyond compliance into other parts of the business, thinking about this example of being an enabler for the business where other supply chain leaders, procurement, IT can actually come in and use this as a tool, because you're not just connecting compliance, right, and ethics related use cases and risks, but also other things that are going on across the business. So I think that's a great model to think about. Yeah. So that was the point I was about to make when I dropped off. So.
Yeah, and it was a point worth making, and I'll kind of supplement that. I mean, it's very similar to kind of like the experience that we had at Albemarle with analytics, right? So yes, first and foremost, we were developing analytics use cases with dashboards primarily for compliance purposes. But we realized that in putting together a compliance dashboard, there was sometimes a related business purpose, a related business dashboard that we could put together at the same time with marginal incremental investment. And I think it is the same with AI, that when you're developing these AI use cases, there could be some incremental value for some related business processes, for sure.
Yeah, and that whole co-investment in the business case can be shared amongst a lot of different internal teams. I think it's a great point.
Yeah. So the final use case that we have here is in relation to data analytics. And what I find super interesting about the use of AI around data analytics is a number of things. So, if there was one drawback with the advent of the tools like Power BI and Tableau and other like Google Analytics, is that there was a bit of a barrier to entry in using those. You needed to upskill in one, how to use those, and then two, how you drew put the data into those platforms. It needed a bit of education and training to kind of do that. And I think that AI is helping to democratize that, because just through the power of a chat message, you're able to ask the AI application to do that analytics for you and show results. And I think that the value of that really comes to the fore when you're trying to compare the effectiveness of one element of your program on another, because you may already have third-party tech out there, including GAN, where they have some really great dashboards, but they are dashboards that focus on the thing that they are delivering, like third-party screening and due diligence, or just on training. The value of an in-house AI analytics tool is that you're able to take data from those different sources, whether internal or from your third-party compliance tech provider, and then start doing some sort of correlation analysis. We've got some examples here of assess the impact of such as tone from the top communications from middle and top level management, the impact of when a policy was launched. What is the impact of those events on things like compliance with controls, training completion rates, speak up rates? So you're moving beyond kind of just looking at training completion. You're really digging behind, seeing, well, what actually caused our training completion to go up or to accelerate or maybe to slow down? Or what's causing, is there a link between how when a leader is speaking up about the importance of speaking up, it is having an impact on our speak up rates. And so if we'll move to the next slide. What you see here on the screen is a mock AI use case that I set up one afternoon. It took me about an hour, not even 2 hours, to do exactly that. So what I did was I created I asked AI to create some mock data. I didn't want to use client data. I asked it to create some mock data for training completion rates, for tone from the top communications, and policy launch dates. And I said, I want 1,000 employees mock data for training, 100 communication dates, and then 15 different policy launch dates. And I want you to put that into a spreadsheet in a way in which we can run analytics. But I don't want you, and I want you also to include some hidden themes in there, but don't tell me what they are. And so we literally within seconds, after a bit of back and forth, it created this mock data set in a CSV file. And then what I asked it to do is based on that CSV file, I'd now want you to create some analytics showing that correlation between communications and policy launch on the impact on our controls and on our speak up. And you can see the examples of the graphs in that middle visual. Again, it took a matter of seconds. Once I had communicated clearly what I wanted, it was able to put those together. And it also offered to put them not only in a graph kind of graphic file, but also in the data file that I could upload to a Power BI or to a Tableau to put into a dashboard itself. So it offered to help teach me, if I wanted to be taught, on how to use the data that it had put together in the format appropriate for those visualization tools. But then
Sorry, go on, Andrew. I'll add a comment at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, just the one icing on the cake was then the narrative. And this is the real distinguishing factor between a dashboard and storytelling, is that AI can help you pick up these hidden themes within your dashboard data that you may not otherwise see and build a narrative as to what's happening, which I think is enormously valuable. And you'll see an example of the narrative that it did on the right-hand side. And so, really using AI as an analytics tool, provided you're testing it and you're very clear about the quality of the data going in, it can be very powerful, particularly when you're comparing different data sets for different aspects of your compliance program.
Yeah, and I think I was going to add on there, Andrew, and one of the things we talk to a lot of our customers again about is this AI use case across the data and the analytics, right? And I think, you think about board reporting, audit risk committee, executive reporting, it can take time, right? When your data is fragmented, and it can take about 3 weeks to do it, right? And so we're actually working with customers right now with AI and analytics where it's just connected directly into that data set, right? And it's able to use natural language processing, put the AI prompt in, give me a bar chart that shows me this, and then give me all my third-party risks that are high in a certain region, or give me my third-party risk data where there's a conflict involved. And so this is where, it builds from what you were talking about before around that foundational layer, right? The data is really critical, right, to start to leverage AI, right? Not just across the use cases, but thinking about the AI analytics, right? And now what this power is giving you, right, to look at program effectiveness and, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve as an organization. So it's getting there, and I think the tools and the opportunities out there are growing rapidly. right, for organizations.
I noticed just because we're on this slide, there was a great question around, some data not being available necessarily in the table format, like communications data. And I think that that's a really, it's an interesting point that in order to take the full advantage of AI, you perhaps have to lean into that intentional creation of data. So, the examples given was communications data, and you're absolutely right that, unlike training data where you've got it all neatly stored in your LMS, you may not currently have a tool for tracking key metadata around communications. In my example, I just literally had the name of the fictional leader and then the date of the communication and which business unit or function that they were part of. That, if there is no kind of communications tracking tool, then do you need to create something like that? Is it worth making the investment with your program administration team to set some sort of tracking tool up so that you can unlock the power of really understanding the value of that communications on other aspects of your program?
Fantastic. So let's jump ahead and think about responsible compliance AI by design. And I kind of have this thing in my head about, let's get back to a little bit of reality here, right? In terms of it become the department of reality and some of the things that organizations should really be thinking about in terms of some of the pitfalls and challenges, right, that we can learn from, right, from the early adopters, right? And I think very old expression, garbage in, garbage out, right? And so AI is only going to operate as good as the data that's fed to the models, right? And, you talked a lot in those use cases, Andrew, around the knowledge base, right? And feeding the right data to get you the right outcomes and objectives that you want. So how do you think about that, right, in terms of this notion of the data's got to be right?
Yeah, so I think it's also a case of the data doesn't necessarily, you absolutely have to make sure that your data is accurate, but it also may need to be slightly enriched to unlock the real value of the AI. So it goes back to my modern slavery database example. It wasn't just a case of relying on the metadata already put into the PDF. I needed to actually add some additional metadata that would enhance the quality of the feedback that I got when I was doing my chat. So the challenge, I would say, relative to something like dashboards when it comes to kind of like numerical data, is that normally when you're using a dashboard, you can kind of spot when there's a poor quality data in there that may be throwing something out that it doesn't quite look right. So there's perhaps a bit more transparency, whereas with AI, you don't get that much transparency as to what that underlying data is. It's only going to give you the data you ask for. It's not going to present the totality of the data like in a dashboard. And so with AI, it becomes even more important to be, as part of your controls, validating and revalidating the accuracy of the data, both structured and unstructured, that's going in.
Yeah, and I think that leads nicely into this notion of the black box, right, and bias, and, understanding how the AI models are helping you to make decisions, right? That explainability, you need to have comfort in that as a compliance team, right? And making sure there isn't a bias there with the AI based on the data you're feeding it. And I think the other thing, and I think it came up as one of the questions around the regulatory expectations, right? You must be able to defend that output, right? Just because AI said it, I don't think that makes it defensible, right? And I was curious, Andrew, if you've had conversations around this and your work with customers also on this bias and ensuring that that doesn't happen and having it defendable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that bias mitigation and defendability are distinct concepts, right? So that auditability of your AI use case is important. And as we'll come on to the next slide, when you're building your AI use case, you're also building the controls that need to be put in place inherent in that. And one of them is around bias, but in order to detect bias, you need auditability, that audit trail to figure out what's going on, for sure.
Yeah. I think the third one, just to think about is a privacy dilemma, right? And, not training public AI models, right? That's a big thing when you think about the enterprise. And I remember back when last year, Andrew, someone said that people were using public AIs to put merger and acquisition contracts in to summarize them. That's just not a good model. We talked about speak up earlier, right? And there is data privacy concerns around things that, may go to outside counsel when you think about incidents and investigations. We need to be very practical and ensure that we live with AI within those regulations and policies internally, but also regulatory, right, as well, right? And thinking of things like GDPR and PL. And then, thinking about the over-reliance and hallucinations, that comes up a lot, right? Hallucinations is AI making things up, right, as it goes along. And curious on your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of perhaps one of the biggest reasons for the human in the loop, right? So whatever the output is from your AI use case, that it's not automatically triggering action without some sort of oversight. So it's fine for preparing a draft email for response, but it needs a human to actually review that response to make sure that it's getting it absolutely right. And that's where the importance of testing, right? It's one thing to build an AI use case, but there is that expectation of the go forward monitoring and testing to make sure that there aren't things like drift, like that there's a degradation in the quality of the output. So again, that is something that is built into the controls when you're building the AI use case.
Yeah. And I think the final one on here we want to cover off is obviously AI governance, right? And there's been a lot of work in organizations around building AI governance policies. But I think the key takeaway here is to also think about ensuring that from a compliance and the ethics perspective, the use cases you're using across AI are also factored into those governance policies, right? We've talked about a lot of things to the left of this box in terms of privacy and bias and, thinking about, if the regulator asks, why did you approve the third party, can you reproduce that AI decision? So I think there's practicalities there from an AI governance standpoint as well, Andrew.
Yeah, and I would also kind of flip it as well and say that there are some truly unique risks presented by ethics and compliance use cases. There's a great example of that in the chat about how the interplay between policy chatbots and whistleblower legislation. So, you have to be very careful that if you're setting up a policy chatbot, if someone is starting to talk about wanting to make a whistleblower report via the policy chatbot, there's a very, very clear response about how to use the right channels for raising that grievance. And the policy chatbot is not the right place for an employee to be raising those grievances. Similarly, it should not be a place where even worse, the chatbot is disincentivizing an employee from whistleblowing to a regulator. We know that that would be a big problem. This, again, goes back to the design of your policy chatbot and the prompt instructions to deal with those unique ethics and compliance risks in this AI use case.
Yeah, great point. So then as we step into, thinking about building, use cases, I'd love you to touch on this as we kind of then get into okay, what happens on Monday morning? How do we start putting this into action?
Yeah, so we're not going to get into the detail of this, but really what this is if you think about it, when you're you're building a house, as you're building the house, you've got the plans from the architect, and you've got the construction company working to those plans, and inherent through that build process is the architect plans, but also the controls that the company wants to put in place itself in terms of building that house, but then also the local compliance. And it's no different with AI. So when you're building a new AI use case, it's like a new it's a new product. And within that, you have to make sure that you're dealing with both the build and the construction element of it, but also the controls. And so you see in the bullets, these are some of the examples of what are the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of the build of the AI use case, but then also the controls. So things like monitoring and the way in which you set up your prompting and how the AI use case responds to some inappropriate requests, like what we were just talking about in the context of Speak Up. And so when I'm developing AI use cases for clients using their enterprise AI tools, this is the framework that I'm using to help them and their AI developer build out those use cases in a way that has responsible AI embedded into the design of the use case.
Yeah, great stuff there and great takeaways. So thinking about takeaways and conclusions, right? Let's think about what's the Monday morning to-do list, Andrew, for anyone on the call?
Yeah, so I mean, just very quickly, if you're at the start of your journey, one, you're not alone, right? You're trying to figure out as a function, where do you get started with the utilizing of AI beyond the tactical use that you may already be doing? And so whether you or as a team reflecting on what are your most time-consuming activities, can Gen AI help? If so, is that a build yourself kind of question, or do you want to kind of consider outsource options? You know, there are definitely opportunities, pros and cons either way. If you do decide to build it in-house, then things like making sure that the data is correct, that the prompt instruction is tested. You can actually use AI to help you design and test the prompt itself. And then once you've got it up, test and refine again, because I think someone said earlier, there's no guarantee that when you put in kind of like a particular question more than once, that you'll get the same answer. But identical answer. What you want is at least a consistent answer. And so it might not use exactly the same language, but if it's a policy chatbot, that it's actually getting the answer to the question right. And then the more that you invest in that first use case, what you find from the learning of it, a little bit like data analytics, once you start, you can't stop. It becomes almost like so empowering that you then move on to the next AI use case and you learn again from that. And you find it just becomes quicker and quicker that you're setting up these discrete mini use cases.
Yeah, I love that. And we put together just some practical questions. We won't cover this off. I think this is a great checklist for people who are embarking on that entry into these use cases. So great source of reference there to review. So the future, Andrew, right? We moved from Gen AI to agentic AI, not just generating text. So maybe a couple of examples maybe we could share, and we might have time for a question or two that Oscar can throw at us.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that really it's if we think about agentic AI, if we talk about those, if we take due diligence as an example, we talked about those individual steps along the due diligence lifecycle. Well, with agentic AI, you're effectively creating a workflow of those individual AI use cases, and you're leaving it to the AI agent to then go and do those things with less human involvement at the individual steps, that there is this daisy chain approach to the execution of not one, but multiple tasks. You may have seen, if you're using something like ChatGPT 5.2, you can see it almost doing that now, because it's telling you a running commentary of the individual task that it's doing in order to fulfill your request. It's kind of like a form of agentic AI. And I think that that's where it's going to go. And so if you're heading down that, then you have to be really sure that your controls are tight, because now there's less of a human in the loop. I still think that we are some way away from truly unlocking that. I've got some big questions about how that would work, but it's certainly something for the future, I think.
Yeah. That's great advice. And I know we're running really close on time, but there's some great resources from GAN Integrity and Integrity Bridge if you want to access. There's a lot more content to help kind of build from that. But I'll hand over to Oscar. And we love the questions and the interaction and the opportunity to present this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you both, Colin and Andrew. Yes, that was a great webcast. Lots of great information. Because of the time constraints, we are going to have to go ahead and wrap up here. But yes, please keep in mind that with to obtain your CPE credit for this presentation, please disable your pop-up blockers to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically, and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcast@complianceweek.com. And again, with Compliance Week, we have Compliance Week events. We bring together influential leaders across compliance, legal, risk, and ethics for engaging discussions on top of the mind compliance news, the sharing of best practices, program benchmarking, and networking. Speakers include practitioners, regulators, thought leaders, and more. For more information on our events, visit complianceweek.com/events. And also with this webcast has been recorded and will be available later today to Compliance Week members on our website under the webcast tab, which also contains a library of additional CPE webcasts. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member, please contact us at info@complianceweek.com. As a member, you will receive full access to tools and resources, discounts to conferences, and our editorial coverage, including the stories linked to the slide deck related to, to the topics discussed during this presentation. For today only, we invite you to use code 499MEMBER, that's the numbers 499MEMBER, to receive a membership that saves you $100. Check out complianceweek.com/membership to learn more. So yes, this concludes our webcast. Thank you again, and goodbye.